Hello, welcome to Dyslexia Explored. I'm Darius Namdaran, your host, and today we've got an exciting episode to talk about. Our guest has experienced dyslexia as a teacher and that wake up call, and then also experienced dyslexia through her son and that whole journey of dyslexia with her son and some of the strategies that she's come up with and discovered along the way, especially around touch typing. There's a really interesting topic about touch typing in here. And then we talked about football within his son's life and sport in general, and how dyslexia can affect you in your sport, be a huge advantage, and have some small disadvantages in unexpected areas. Then we talked about ADHD and looked at mental health side of things and how our speakers experience in researching mental health and our plans to look into mental health in the future and maybe even do a PhD in it. So welcome to Liz Day. Liz, it's been great. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Darius. It's great to be talking to you.
So Liz, we on Dyslexia Explored explore the story arc of dyslexia in your life. So first off, have you got dyslexia?
No, I haven't. There's a lot of dyslexia within my family, which I'm sure I'll come on to later. But no, for me, myself, I often almost describe my brain actually as opposite to dyslexic because a lot of the strengths and weaknesses are the opposite in my head.
Got you. So what was life like before you discovered dyslexia, and what was your wake-up call to dyslexia?
So I certainly didn't know a lot about dyslexia. During my teacher's training, we had one lecturer who had a child who had visual stress. So we were taught a little bit about that. And I think within that, it may have been mentioned that there could be a link with dyslexia. I was always, all through my training, and even when I was just working with sort of coaching young children from the age of 14, I've worked with children in some kind of capacity. And I was always sort of interested in the ones who maybe were a little bit different or found things a bit harder, or there was something happening. So when I heard about this visual stress, I was really intrigued and thought, it's important that everyone's included and everyone understands and we make sort of differences where we can. And then in my very first teaching job back in 1999, I taught in a private school and I met this adorable little boy, Charlie, who just seemed so bright to me, so talented in so many ways. And at the first parents' evening, I was there all bright and fresh and young, 22-year-old, all ready to, change the world and inspire all these children. And I said to Charlie's parents, I just think he's amazing because he's so bright and so able and he doesn't let his dyslexia hold him back. And they looked at each other and looked at me. And I thought, oh no, what have I said? What have I done wrong on my first parents' meetings? And they said, he cries every night because he thinks he's stupid. And the shiver that went down my spine because I thought this can't happen. This is not right. He's not stupid. What, this just isn't right at all. I mean, I think he was very lucky from the sense that that school were amazing and ahead of their times with having a dyslexia expert come in, who at the time, I remember chatting to her because I found everything she did so interesting and was so pleased she was helping people. She worked a lot with MPs, but wasn't allowed to mention any of the names of the MPs she worked with, because at that point, for an MP to say they were dyslexic would be a massive sign of weakness.
Oh, I see. She didn't just work with them in terms of, advocacy or promotion, but to actually help them with their
She
dyslexia. Oh, wow.
supported them with their dyslexia, which was an amazing insight for me. And the work she did with Charlie and other children, I asked to go along to some of her one-to-one sessions so that I could learn more. And she just had such a lovely approach. And I mean, I wish I'd stayed in contact with her. And I can't even remember her name now, but I feel like I only worked with her for a very short period of time, which is a kind of a different story to do with my own neurodivergence. But actually, it was a permanent job. And I only taught for one term because I decided it was time to do something else. But that's a whole other story. But in that time, I found her so fascinating. And it definitely started that idea of we can't have children feeling that they're stupid when they're absolutely not. They're just slightly different to other children, and they've got so many strengths. And for whatever reason, and I don't think at that point I could particularly see that it was the education system, whereas I think a lot of it now is, but I just saw there was something not right, and I couldn't allow it to happen. So I became really interested then in dyslexia and any kind of differences, really, particularly things you can't see.
Okay, so I'd like to just go back a little bit into what your wake-up call was. So the wake-up call was these parents saying, oh, he's not dealing with it. But let's just go back a little bit earlier. What did wake you up to dyslexia itself before that? What was the thing where you discovered what dyslexia was? Was it through Charlie? Or, yeah, could you just go dial into that a bit more?
Yeah, definitely. I'd heard the term, as I was saying, through university. I'd also chosen, I'm a PE specialist, and I'd chosen to do a particular project on dyspraxia. So I was very interested in kind of that area. I mean, now if I was training, I would have said I was interested in neurodiversity. At that point, we didn't use that terminology, or at least I wasn't aware of it. So I was always interested in differences. And then working with Charlie, and just, well, I just thought he was amazing. And I just, it was that the way the specialist was working with him sort of got me that, like, this is incredible, this is fantastic. And then that real shock moment of finding out that he masked so well, really, because at school he seemed this really happy, able boy. Yes, he was taken out for certain lessons, and I didn't think about that as a negative. I just thought, brilliant, it's helping him. But in his head, he was seeing it as a weakness, and, well, I'm not as good as everyone else. I can't do what they're doing. And then he'd go home and reflect on that. And because he was aware that some things were more difficult for him, he just assumed that meant he was stupid, and he cried about it. And that just hit me so hard, because it just, I suppose it didn't match with what I saw of him.
Yeah,
And
it's such a
I just
lesson.
knew that he's not the only one. There's going to be lots
Yeah,
of Charlies out there.
yes. So you were a PE teacher, or what kind of teacher were you in the school?
So I was primary, so I taught everything. It was a private school. So I was a PE specialist in the school, but I did teach some other subjects as well.
Okay, so you were in primary school, but you weren't a primary school teacher. You're a specialist school in a primary school.
No, it was a private school. So they actually had PE specialists in the primary school, but I had trained as a primary school teacher with a PE specialism.
Oh, so you did
So
both.
I,
I went to a private school as well. I was a teacher in a Rudolf Steiner school, and I was a primary school teacher, and I taught clay modeling and woodwork on the side as part of my, work. So you did something similar.
yeah, so instead of, most of my friends went into a state primary school and taught every subject, I was trained to teach every subject. And later on, I've done that in various age groups of schoolings. But for that school, I was employed as the primary PE specialist, but then I taught maths, I taught a little bit of English, I taught cookery, which I think my own children would find hilarious now.
Yes,
So there
fantastic.
was some other bits to fill the timetable.
Understood. Okay. So from Charlie, you didn't stay there long, and you had an ADHD moment where you chopped and changed and found something else shiny. What was the shiny thing you found next?
Well, it was more, first of all, I suppose, the thought of what it could be if I didn't find something shinier. And I sat in a staff room with lots of middle-aged women who are probably, actually, they were probably younger than I am now, but hey, who all said, oh, I should have got out of teaching earlier. I should have got out of teaching earlier. And me and my spontaneity meant that at 22, I thought that meant in my first term of teaching, I should jump. And I'd always been very interested in working with children. As I mentioned, I worked in some capacity, mostly voluntarily, with children from the age of 14. So it seemed the natural thing to be a teacher. And then I had a couple of wobbles along the way of, like, oh, but there's so much more out there that I could be doing as well. So as a student, I'd worked for a bowling centre alongside my studies, and someone I'd met through that was opening a brand new centre in London, and they needed a sales manager. And I thought, well, I can do that. And I also blame my granddad for this, who was absolutely, definitely undiagnosed ADHD. And at some point, probably around the age of when I was about 14, and I just started gymnastics coaching. And one of my coaches said to my mum, well, she has to be a teacher because she's just brilliant with children. And my granddad said, well, she might be brilliant at lots of things. And I think there was this little thing in my head, well, maybe I would be, maybe I could be. And I was always trying to find something I was brilliant at because I never really felt brilliant. So yes, I switched over to go and work in this bowling centre as the sales manager. That's a whole other story and didn't work out for sort of quite difficult reasons, actually, personally. So then I had to kind of decide what to do with my life. Could always rely on supply teaching. So I was grateful that I had done a teacher's training, because at one point during my degree, I was going to change just to a sports degree. And I thought, no, I'll keep doing it so I've got the qualification. So I did temping work, I did various things over the years. And then only 3 years later, I guess, I got married and I went on a year-long honeymoon, as you do, and traveled the world a bit, saw different things, then got back from that and fell into a job, initially as a temping job, helping the PA to the chief executive of Lee Valley Regional Park Authority. And on my first day, she said, the thing that's pushing me over the edge is all this talk of the Olympics in 2012. I was like, ping, I'm interested in this. I love anything to do with sport. That's my passion. So ended up working for them for the next 5 years, and got involved in everything to do with the bid for the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games, and was also put through qualifications to do with communications and PR, so that I wasn't just a teacher, I had the qualifications. So that's where my sort of that side of thing comes in. Then with young children myself, decided to move back to Devon where we had more family support. And then comes my own sort of more connected personal journey with dyslexia, when over time I realised my son was dyslexic. His development was very different to my daughter, who's just under 2 years older. And I'd always been aware of kind of not comparing children. I know they're all different. They develop at different stages. And I wasn't concerned ever, but I could just notice things. And it was interesting because sometimes when you mention things to people, the immediate reaction was, well, don't compare them. Don't compare them. And I'd be like, well, I'm not as such, I'm not saying he should be like she is, but there are differences and I can see that. And that's okay if they're going to just carry on developing in their own way. But once he started school, reception, he was okay because it was all quite practical, not getting things down on paper, not much reading. And then year one, it really kicked in for him. So although I'd seen some signs earlier with sort of language delays, it was really when he was in year one that I thought, I need to look into this more, because he was losing his confidence. And at the time, and I believe some schools still do it, but it was a massive thing at the time to do a weekly big write. And all the children would sit, have their paper, they'd be introduced to a topic, have their little hook, and then they'd write about it. And I was working part-time at my son's school at the time and good friends with his teacher. And the teacher said to me, Liz, I'm a little bit worried because he writes out some sentences, not very much in the time that everyone else writes quite a bit more. He writes them out and then he rubs them out. And when I've asked him, he said it's because no one will be able to read it. He can't understand it and no one else will. So, okay, that's interesting. At that point, I realized they'd obviously been put, not obviously, it's not always the case, but they were put into groups for writing and reading and everything else. Because in reception, he had good vocabulary. He couldn't always get it out, but that hadn't been sort of taken into consideration. He had good vocabulary. He had a good understanding. He was put in the top group for reading, for writing, certainly. And sort of generally for most things, I think. But he wasn't able to work in the same way as the other children there. So what was happening was that it was lovely in one way that the teacher hadn't thought, oh, he's less intelligent because he can't do this. He'd thought, he should be up there, he should be in that group. But actually, Josh was then comparing himself to children who could get things down on paper and looking around thinking, well, I should be able to do it like them. And mine's just a mess. I can't read it. It's messy writing. And his self-confidence was really going. And that was the point that, again, it was almost like that Charlie trigger. This can't happen. I can't have him feeling bad about himself. So I spoke to the school, had various conversations over the years, and I would say they were mixed, and it was hard being some of the time I was teaching part-time there alongside doing bits of everything that worked for my brain. And there were times when it was really hard because I understood how difficult it was for the school. Some individuals were more helpful than others. Some people saw it as I did. Some people saw it as you're comparing your children. You want him to be like her. No, I don't. I just want each of them to reach their own potential. But what I did was I paid to go on British Dyslexia Association dyslexia training so that I actually had the professional knowledge as well as looking into things personally. And I did what I could to try and understand what was happening, understand what support he needed. And my main focus always was his idea of himself and how he viewed himself, and trying to maintain that image that he was more than what he could read and write. And that wasn't a measure of his intelligence. It sort of became a bigger issue again in year 2, when maths had always been his strong point and the thing that, he didn't find a problem with. In fact, he would sometimes, when my daughter was doing her homework at the kitchen table, he would sometimes answer her questions that had been read out before she did. And she was known as the typically academic one. So he really understood maths. But by year 2, there were lots of word problems. So yet again, there was an issue with the group he was in. So at that point, he was pulled down a maths group, and he was with children who weren't as able as him at maths. And that brought its own problems, because he thought, why aren't I with my friends? I can do what they're doing. But it's down to resources, really. They would have needed someone to sit with him, or what, in an ideal world, he'd have had a peer support. So one of the other children could have read the questions to him. He would have supported them when they were struggling. But I know that sounds easier than it is. When you're a class teacher with 30 children, it's hard to implement all those things. So again, he was knocked in a different way at year 2 by sort of almost being told he wasn't so good at maths. As we went through schooling, I had constant conversations with school, and I feel sorry for them because they didn't necessarily have the knowledge. We went through the sort of speech therapy route. They told me to check that his hearing and his eyesight was okay, which is all valid. But to me, I felt like I was being sort of shrugged off a bit and like, oh, it's all, just leave it, it'll all sort itself out. And my dad was a teacher, and my dad often had this belief that quite often, especially with boys, they will develop at a later point of view, a later time, and there's no problem with that. And I've seen that. And I don't know whether there's any research on this and whether how scientific it is, but I have noticed it actually, particularly with size development. So boys who grow later do often seem to develop later. And my son was a smaller child and is now 6 foot, and totally he's developed fully. And so I felt there was some judgment also, in some sense, from some people that, oh, why are you pushing for things? And the school would implement what they had available, and a lot of that didn't match what my son needed. So they put in certain kind of writing interventions that they were using for other children that were working for other children who were maybe more sort of lower ability, had other things going on. It wasn't working for my son because it wasn't the right thing for what he needed. It wasn't addressing his needs. No one sat down and said, well, what are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? How can we support his weaknesses with his strengths and build up strategies? So it was hard for him. And as a parent and as someone who was teaching in the school, and a lot of the staff were my friends, but we got through it. And he became, the more we talked to him as well about, look, we think you've got something called dyslexia. We think you're dyslexic. And I can't remember exactly what point, but at some point we started talking about it as being delightfully dyslexic. And he's always actually, since he's heard about the fact that he probably was dyslexic, he's been really proud of it. And he would often even make jokes with his friends when he was on Xbox. He'd sort of say, and he realized over time when we looked more into his strengths and weaknesses, that processing speed is a big issue for him, still is now. For when he's talking, for seeing things, it's like that. So in a football match, he can see exactly what's happened, and I'm still trying to work out when they kicked off. But if it's saying things or getting things down on paper, he's slower. So he knew he needed extra time. So he would make jokes with his friends on Xbox saying, hey, I messed that up because I didn't have my extra time. You didn't give me my extra time. And his friends have all been really lovely about dyslexia and and recognize that it's not a sign that he's not intelligent. It's that he thinks differently. So we live in a school with a grammar school system, which isn't my ideal. And especially for someone who potentially is going to develop a bit later, it's really tricky. But he came with us to look around schools when we were looking for my daughter. As I say, that was like 2 years ahead of him doing it. And I say unfortunately, but it was lovely, really. The head teacher and the admissions person were absolutely amazing at that school. Both have now retired, but I spoke to them about, look, if my son was to consider doing it in a couple of years' time, the 11 plus, would he get extra time, blah, blah, blah. And they were really lovely about it. They asked me about him as a person, found out he loved football, found out that maths was a strength of his. And then he wandered over to us and they immediately engaged with him. Now, the reason I say, unfortunately, they were so lovely is that from that moment, he was like, I love this school. I want to go there. And I thought, oh my goodness, he's got to do these tests, which are predominantly literacy based, when his literacy is not where you would expect the average child to be, and he needs to be ahead of that to get into the grammar school. Anyway.
Yes. So let me just explain for the American listeners, and the Australians. So for the American listeners, the grammar school system is a legacy in the UK, where basically what they did was at age 11, they would give all the children in the country a test. Now, this was from like 40 years ago. It's changed now. Some schools keep this test, but not all our schools, maybe like 5% of the schools. And this is called an 11 plus test. So what they did was they tested every 11-year-old in the country and they streamed them according to 3 streams. And they put them onto, was it 3 streams? Yes. Highly academic, academic and then practical. So if you did really well in this, you got streamed into a very academic school, or you got streamed into a different medium academic school. And it was kind of like, oh, these are the executives and politicians of the future. And then these are the managers of the future. And these are the tradespeople of the future. And we'll just find them when they're 11 and send them on their paths. And that's what the 11 plus test was trying to do. And it's simplified down very much into this written test. And as a result of that test, they get in or out of these schools. And it's often private schools where they have these 11 plus type tests. A lot of private schools don't have 11 plus tests. They just have their own entrance exam, but it's basically a refactored version of the 11 plus test, isn't it?
Yeah, and if I can explain a bit more what's happened now, I think actually makes it worse than the original system with the different streams, because it's often seen more as a pass or fail. It's either you go to, and for us in this area, they are 11 state grammar schools, not private ones. And you either get into the grammar school or you fail and you go to a non-grammar school, a comprehensive school. So what that means is, and although it's the 11 plus, the majority they take it right at the beginning of year 6. The majority of children are still 10. And at the age of 10, they've passed or failed and they feel like failures or successes. And yeah, it's horrible to see. And it means that in your comprehensive schools, you've taken off the children who at that age were academically doing better. Not always, but often that means you've got a lot of children who behaviourally are more settled have come out and gone to the grammar school. And you're left with all sorts of difficulties because it's not a completely
Yes.
mixed environment elsewhere. And plus, for the children at the grammar school, there can often be a lot of pressure. I have to say, we have the choice of single sex grammar schools here and a mixed grammar school. I am so pleased my children had the experience of a mixed grammar school that was much more rounded and from the beginning said they wanted children to do sport, to do drama, to do music, not just be academic. Whereas my personal experience of growing up in the same area and going to the girls' grammar school was very different and didn't suit me at all. So yeah, it's a bizarre system and it causes difficulty. But I sort of thought I won't have this problem because we're not gonna have our children growing up in Devon and then decided to move back when they were little and thought, oh no, I've got this issue. And overall, it seemed to be the best option to suit their needs, especially as I say, this mixed grammar school. So Josh worked really hard at everything he needed to do to try and sort of get through these tests. That I not varied even, but I was quite strong on what I would do with him at home because I felt he was shattered by the time he came home because he worked so hard. He was a child. You sort of see it coming out in different ways. And I've taught some dyslexic children who end up almost being the class clown because they've got to excel in some way so they can make the jokes and they, and trying to get them to do any work can be hard. And whereas he worked so hard, every teacher has always said what a hard worker he was. I have to say, working on homework was never quite the same, but actually I always thought that doesn't matter. He can't work hard all the time. He would do enough to hand it in. And for me, that was okay. Whereas at school, he would work so hard. But when he got home, I felt he should just relax, do the fun things, do sport, do football in particular, which has always been his big passion. So I wasn't keen on doing lots of extra things with him at home. We did a couple of different things, but one, I said to school, well, this is going to replace his reading for now. So he went through a workbook called Toe by Toe, and we did that each day instead of his reading. And then he also used touch, type, read and spell because I thought it would help him to have the skill of typing. His dad, who is undiagnosed but pretty definitely dyslexic, has always found touch typing really helpful. He happened to learn it at secondary school and it's been really helpful. It means he can get ideas down quicker. He can edit work better than if he was writing it. So I thought, well, great, get Josh typing. And I was actually teaching full time at a different school by this point and really didn't take in the reading and spelling part. Just thought, oh, whatever. Okay, that's probably some gimmick. It's the touch typing that will help. And he did it very, very slowly because, as I say, I didn't want to overload him. So I actually do a lot of work with touch, type, read and spell now. And we generally say to people, if a child spends, or an adult, even an hour a week on the main course, they'll probably complete it in a year. Whereas with Josh, he just did 20 minutes a week and it took him 3 years. So the timing was kind of right, but we really lengthened it. And that really, really helped him. And actually, he ended up starting secondary school with a reading age above his own age when it has always been below. It blew my mind. And I suddenly thought, oh my goodness, this reading and spelling thing, it does work. And that's been fantastic. And one of the reasons why I've gone on to sort of work alongside them and be a consultant for them. So that really helped. I have to say, just to add to the whole complication of the 11 plus system.
Just clarify what really helped. So for listeners, could you make it explicit? What was this? Was it a software? Was it the book? So you mentioned you did the book Toe by Toe. And for those of you who are listening that aren't in the UK, Toe by Toe is a go-to book for a lot of people. What you'll find is a lot of people will say, oh, your child's got dyslexia. Oh, you've got to try Toe by Toe. It's like step one. And it's one book. and it's like £15 or something like that, and you work through this book with your child. It's very different from Orton Gillingham and so on in America, where you go away for maybe 2 sessions a week and are paying $40 a session, and it takes like 2 years. It's very different in the UK. We don't have anything like that, anything like these Orton Gillingham programs or so on, but we have Toe by Toe. This one book a parent tries to struggle through with their child and teach them how to read with Toe by Toe. It helps a lot of people. It's very phonics based and so forth. But
Very dry, but it works for some children that are happy with that approach.
yes, it's definitely the minimum viable approach you could think of. Sponsored by Ivy. Imagine turning your meeting's audio into a live mind map instantly so you remember what matters. Well, try Ivy for free now at ivy.app. That's IVVI.app. What was this other thing? So you did the touch typing, but then you said something about spelling and so on.
First of all, with the toe by toe, it did help him, and he was willing to do this very dry approach because he knew it would help. And I think that did make a difference because it goes over some of the sound patterns, and it started off as something suggested through school when I was saying, look, what can be done. They were going to do it with him at school, but it needs to be done every day, pretty much. Just a tiny bit every day, and it wasn't being done every day. So there was no point it being picked up every few weeks. So that's at the point I said, look, we'll do it at home, but we'll do it instead of his reading book. So that was helpful. But then the touch typing, it's a program called Touch Type Read and Spell, and it is actually based on the Orton Gillingham approach.
Oh, really?
It's a UK-based company. Father and son business. They're absolutely lovely, doing it all for the right reasons to support people. Philip, who set it up, was a teacher, taught in New Zealand, I believe, and heard about different approaches and then came back and set it up.
I think I've seen a Facebook video of him talking about reading and writing. Is it
probably
him?
Not him.
Okay.
If you've seen any TTRS videos, it'll probably actually be me talking on them. It generally now
so I
is
was just
me.
trying to join some dots. Okay.
Yes.
So this family have created, and it's a bit of software.
It's an online platform. Originally, it was a floppy disk that was sent out to people. More recently, it's an online platform. So you pay for a subscription. Some schools pay home. A lot of home educators use it. It's actually, although it started in the UK, there's a bigger market in America, and possibly because of the Orton Gillingham approach and that being more widely known over there and sort of seen as, yes, that's what we want to do.
The gold standard, really.
It's used, I mean, all around the world, actually, lots of different countries. It's used in Australia and New Zealand, but predominantly the UK and the US. And it's a touch typing program, but instead of it being just teaching where the letters are and doing the kind of JK, 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 it teaches real words. So right from the beginning, you're building up real words. So it starts with your consonant, vowel, consonant words like cat, pat, mat. And while they're typing it, they're seeing it, they're hearing it. Some tutors and parents will encourage the child to say it as well. So it's a full multisensory approach with a lot of repetition. And it is based on the Orton Gillingham book. It's absolutely fantastic. And that really, really helped Josh. And I would say of everything that was done to support him, that was the big thing that made a difference to his reading and spelling. And actually, we joke now that my daughter, who's 2 years older and academically seemed to be more sort of fit the average child, well, not the average child, but the average academic child, but her spelling has always been bad. And whether there's some element of dyslexia as well, I'm not quite sure. There's, don't know. But I wish we'd have got her to do touch type read and spell when she was younger, because her spelling now is far worse than my son's. And I'm sure if we hadn't implemented anything, his would be worse. So it really did help.
So let me just, I know you don't want to feel like you're doing a sales pitch for a touch type read and sell, and you're being very polite about it, but feel free to do the full on sales pitch here. So really, I don't mind. I'm really interested in seeing what actually helps different people in different circumstances. So
Can I just check, guys? I mean, I'm a consultant for them, but I'm also an affiliate. So I have an affiliate code that I can offer to people so that they get 10% off. Am I okay to mention that or not?
yeah, of course. Yeah. So we'll put the link in the show notes below,
Thank
and
you.
you can click on that. And Liz will get an affiliate fee, and will they get a discount or anything like that if they do it?
Yeah. So what happens is they get a 10% discount. But also, I always say I'm more than happy to talk to people about what it would mean for them. And I'm a big believer there's not a one size fits all approach ever to anything. So it will work for some people, it won't work for others. And it's just working out what's right for each individual. And touch type read and spell can actually be used for adults as well as children. We've had people in their 80s using it. It can even be helpful for people who have had strokes and then sort of to help get those neuropathways linked up again. It can be
I
really
love
helpful to help with language.
I love this. It's clicking for me because I really love the fact that it's a word that gets read out to you, and then you have to do some physical action to respond to it. So you're not just mentally staying in that sort of phonological loop, or even that working memory phonological loop where you've got to keep it in your working memory. You're sort of mind dumping it into your hands and taking action with it and letting it go so you can take the next thing in. I just love it.
Absolutely. And what we've seen, and I was told about this first of all by a tutor who I was sort of interviewing really to find out more about why TTRS worked and how we could explain to others. And she was saying how she herself and students sometimes think about where their fingers would go on a keyboard,
Oh, they do
even when
it
they're writing
invisibly.
to get the
Oh,
spelling
really?
right. And then
Uh,
much more recently, I think it was last year, I was working with some postgraduate students doing a dyslexia specialist course, and some of them were using touch type read and spell to do one of their mini projects on. And so they'd implemented it with children and they were seeing how it helped. And one lady said, I was really confused because I was sat in class and the children were doing a spelling test. And this one child put her pencil down and started moving her fingers. And I thought, well, what's she doing? Is she anxious? What's going on? And she was doing exactly that. She was remembering where her fingers would go on the keyboard and found that much easier to recall the spelling because it was movement. Whereas when we
yeah,
write, it's such a small movement, whereas typing uses muscle memory and it's almost an extension of your fingers rather than having to think, oh, now how do I form this letter and which direction
yeah.
do I go in?
Fascinating, fascinating.
Yeah.
So, zooming in on your son. So, your son spent 3 years doing this touch, type, read, and spell
Yes.
in preparation for the 11 plus.
In preparation for secondary school, because I thought it would help him to be able to type. So he actually, when he went to secondary school, I think he was about two-thirds of the way through it. But by that
Okay,
point in itself, it had already made a massive difference to his reading.
okay.
Now, without going too much into the whole grammar school system again, he received yeses, which is the system now, if you can apply for the grammar school based on how you've done in the 11 plus. In the past, that has generally meant if you got yeses for all the different grammar schools, you would definitely get a place. He then didn't get a place at the grammar school we'd put forward for him. So he didn't go to a grammar school initially for the first half of year 7. So up until February half term, he was on the waiting list. We thought he would just go to this other school, it'd be fine. There were lots of positives about that school. He was really unhappy. His needs weren't being met. He got very anxious. As a parent, I felt I was being told the right things, but it wasn't matching with what we were seeing for him. And it was really sad to see. So after the Christmas, after that first term, he could sit another test to be on a new waiting list. So he did that. And by the February, they invited him to come and join the grammar school, which he
Wow.
did. And he loved it. That school was so supportive. And to me, it was a great example of how it was fantastic for both my children, even though they're quite different. As I say, the school really supports sport as well. My daughter, when she started in year 7, was an elite gymnast. and would have Wednesday afternoons off for training. The school were more than happy to support that. For my son, he just felt supported. My daughter went all the way through the school, including A levels, and came out with all A's at A level. My son got through his GCSEs and did exactly what we asked him to do, really. Just get through them. Make sure you get your maths and English that you can go on to do whatever you wanted. I mean, he actually passed all 10 GCSEs. None of them were at as high a level as I think he possibly could have if he could just focus on a few. But he passed everything. And then he's changed to a sixth form college to do a BTEC in sport, which is much more practical. He has to do coursework, he has to do presentations, but he doesn't have exams. And that has been fantastic for him. And he's now at the point where he is in his last few weeks of that, and he's on track to get distinctions and distinction stars, which are equivalent to A's and A stars at A level. And for him, makes so much sense. And he's been able to show his knowledge and his passion and what he can do. Whereas I honestly believe he could have stayed on to do A levels. He would have worked hard enough to get through it. He wouldn't have enjoyed it. It wouldn't have sparked his mind. It would have become a sort of process he had to get through. And I imagine he'd have been looking forward to finishing and doing something completely different. Whereas this, he has really enjoyed. He's been part of the football academy alongside it. So the college have a football academy that's linked with our local football team, Torquay United. And he has just had an amazing experience. And right from the first year when they started talking about university, and a lot of students on his course won't go on to university. And there was never any pressure from us that he should do that. But he started, as soon as he looked, he said, I want to go to university and I want to do a football management and analysis course, which is what he's going to go on to study in September. And it's just suited him so well, and following that path for him. Alongside that, just to say this sort of difference really with my daughter and my son, because I think that's so important with dyslexia, that differences don't mean different intelligence. It's how it comes out. And my daughter, as I say, very successful at A levels, didn't feel she wanted to go to university. And again, I never felt that she should do just because she's academic and because she can. So we spent a couple of years traveling, working hard in between, was suddenly decided earlier this year that she would go off to university with 10 days before the applications closed. I think she does have a little bit of my ADHD. Was going to go and do an environmental science degree. That's still on the cards. She could do that, but she's now currently traveling in Indonesia and has actually looked into open university degrees that she can do while she travels. And I think that will suit her brilliantly. So it's just working out what's right for each individual. And she herself, we've recently had a conversation about how we are very similar, me and her, and that maybe she certainly has some traits of ADHD. She has a very healthy mindset, which helps her and makes her be able to be in the moment more and take things more calmly than I have typically done. But that there may be something like that. And she herself said, I suppose, Mum, if you and Dad had forced me to go to university, there would have been more evidence maybe of ADHD and some of the difficulties, because I would have been in an environment I didn't feel happy in and not doing what I wanted to do and would have fought against things. And I think that was interesting for her to see that herself.
Good for her. That takes so much courage, because I remember I ended up getting, 6 hires in one sitting, and my choice was law, medicine, or accounting, the top ones, and off to Oxford to do my Oxford interview and all that kind of jazz. I ended up going to Edinburgh University to do law just because law gave me more options. But actually, I wanted to go to art school or do psychology or not go to uni. And I
Yeah.
bowed to the pressure, but deep respect to her for knowing herself well enough to just say, yeah, okay, I could go and do whatever I want, but I'm going to choose whatever I want, which is not university right now.
Yes.
Good on her. And great on your son as well with the soccer I'm using the word soccer because, again, for those Americans amongst us, when you say football, they'll be thinking American
Yes, of
football,
course.
but we are obviously talking about soccer here. This podcast is sponsored by Dyslexia Productivity. Just as an aside, let's talk about sport and dyslexia for a moment, okay? Because I've got this little theory, this pet theory that I've been have in the back of my mind. I did a whole podcast on this actually with a lady. Gosh, that's going back like 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago. We'll put it in the show notes below if you want to go link to talk about this more. But here's my theory. I think dyslexia's strengths and weaknesses show up on the football pitch. Now, primarily the strengths show on the football pitch, and I'll talk about the weaknesses in a moment, but the strengths often show up as this ability to dynamically read the environment instantly and also tell and predict what's going to happen next. And you are on the ball rather than on what was happening. You know what is going to be happening. And for some reason, you always seem to be in the right place at the right time.
100%, 100%. I've seen that in action with him. And I was mentioning earlier his slow processing with writing things or speaking things. But if it's on a pitch, he has taken everything in. He can also remember everything that's happened in a game from 5 years ago. Ask him about a book from 5 years ago. No chance. It's an incredible ability. And actually, using that strength, I mean, that's partly how he's started to learn to read, because he would look at match attacks cards, the cards with all the famous players on, and he could tell you the names of all these different players. And the words of their names were much more complicated than the words in his book that he was struggling with. But because he'd seen them play and he could put the name with the face, he linked it up and then he could read their
What
name.
a great way to encourage reading is using these trump cards and these collecting cards.
Yeah.
I remember watching a boy with dyslexia playing Pokemon Go, and I play Pokemon Go too, I like it, and he was playing it, and he couldn't read some of the instructions and so on, you
Yeah.
know. And often the instructions for special research and so on, you have to read them to understand what's going on. But he couldn't read it. And I was thinking, that's a big mic drop there. But that's a big
Yeah.
drop on a game as big as Pokemon Go. But the idea of getting the cards and using the cards to encourage you to read because
Yeah.
they're individual words is fantastic.
Yeah, he loved it. And he would sort out all the match attacks cards and put them either into their teams, which was your typical way of saving them. But then he would also make up what he thought were the best teams based on what he'd seen and where the players' strengths were. And he'd do things for hours with those. And we had football top trump cards. So we'd go through those. So he was just doing a little bit of reading. The top trump cards he loved because that's mostly numerical because it's their scores for different areas. And he loved anything to do with numbers, and numbers stick in his brain much more. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think it really shows up a lot as strengths on the football pitch or the soccer pitch. But where the weaknesses have come out, I've noticed, is in the instruction aside from the game. So when he's being
Yeah,
taught a
that's
new
exactly
skill,
my thoughts. Yes.
and I've said to coaches, look, you will have to show him and repeat the instructions and show him again how to pick up a skill. If he can watch you and do it, fine. If you just verbally say it, he is going to struggle. In a game situation, yeah, he's so speedy. And I remember years ago, we've got a video somewhere of him literally appearing from nowhere to then get this ball in the goal. And everyone just looked at each other and went, well, where did he come from? He wasn't anywhere near that end of the pitch. So physically to have got there in time, mentally to have realized he needed to, it was almost like something from a cartoon where, one player was sped up. It was incredible, but he could always, and still does, just seize the game.
So here's my theory. My theory is with dyslexia and any kind of sport, there are three things that end up happening with you. Number one, you see the big picture and know what needs to be done when faster than everyone else. Number two, you become unpredictable.
Yeah.
You don't follow typical patterns and repeat the same pattern all the time. Your automaticity is so bad that you're always improvising, so you're very, very hard to read. And then number
Yes.
three, you are terrible at set plays. Whenever you've got a set play to do, a corner or something that is set, this happens, then that happens, then this happens, you're atrocious at it. And there's consequences to that. And that can often stop you from becoming the higher level player if you don't find a way around that. So I see those three patterns happening over and over with people with dyslexia.
Yeah, that's fascinating, actually. And we always used to sort of half joke, really, that he would often mess up or miss the opportunities that were really easy, seemed to be easy, just a quick knock and it would have gone into goal. But then ones where you thought, well, there's no chance of this going in, he would score, or he would, if he was in defense, he'd save it. So, yeah, absolutely, there's that. And yes, and I think this is something that I've become very passionate about. Sport has always been important to me. With my own work, I've now set up a community interest company called Collectively Diverse to help train other people. My key aspect in that now is around training for sport and working with PE teachers, coaches, clubs, community groups, because I think we've got so many children who are dyslexic and other neurodivergencies who could go to the standard sports environment and their talent could be missed and they could be turned off by it as well because they're not reached in the right way. So if, for example, a football session was all skills based and they were shouted at, do this, do that, and not shown, they're not going to enjoy it. They're not going to be able to pick up the skills. If it demonstrated and taken step by step and repeated, their skills are going to be seen and they're going to really enjoy it and literally run with it. So yeah, it's a massive passion of mine to really get that understanding across all of sport. And you see it across so many sports. Gymnastics is my first love for sport. And there are so many gymnasts with particularly ADHD who literally they started it because their parents thought they needed to burn off energy. However, I've also seen as a coach myself, children who are probably in that category who haven't stayed for long because things weren't adapted for them and it was just seen as bad behavior if they wouldn't do certain things. Whereas the ones who it has the adaptations have been made, it's actually really helped them to be able to sort of be disciplined in certain situations, but also to exert their energy and to have that sort of dopamine rush of achieving a new skill and things like that. So yeah, there's so much to look at with sport and dyslexia and other neurodivergencies.
Did you, I love sport because it sort of reveals so much so visually and practically and also empirically as well, you know? It's not fuzzy, you know, you get it in the goal, you get the score, you hit the mark, whatever it is. Do you know the book Bounce? Have you read the book Bounce?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
You know the story in the book Bounce where they talk about the guy is a table tennis player and the British scientists come in and measure his reflexes. Do you remember
yes.
that?
Yeah, I don't
I
remember all the
just
details, but yes, very much remember
so
about that. Yeah.
this story is so powerful. So he was the British table tennis champion, and this UK university came to research him and the British team because they were going to be doing quite well on the world stage. And they decided they were going they made this assumption. Obviously, table tennis players have very good reaction speeds. Yeah. So they made that assumption, and that was a, you know, punchline. That was a flaw. So they went in and they tested his reaction speed to a table tennis ball, and he completely flunked it. He was really bad, slow reaction speed. And so they canceled the research because they thought there was something wrong with their measuring devices, you
Oh,
know?
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
And so
amazing.
they said, obviously, there's something wrong with our measurement devices, so we can't do an accurate, it's obviously not calibrated right or something. They went away. Well, they did really well. A couple of years back, they came back with the fixed the equipment, and they did the test on him, and he still did really bad, and all the others were really good. And they could not understand it until they started to record his way of playing. And what they realized was that he was compensating for his slow reaction speed by reading the person's ability and pre-guessing what the person was going to do. And he would pre-read where the ball would go before even the ball was hit. And so what looked like fast reaction speed was actually this ability to predict, unconsciously predict where the ball was going to go. And so even a person with slow reaction speed had a fast hit. And then they realized that was their actual scientific breakthrough, that
Yeah.
people who did really well at sport weren't necessarily really able at the subject, naturally athletic or naturally fast reflexes, but they had done intentional, repeated practice with feedback that gave them the ability to start reading what was going to happen next.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the key things was that repetition, wasn't it? It was that constant repetition to build up those other skills that aren't
Yes.
necessarily the initial skills you think of. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Absolute
Fascinating.
incredible insight. And I think a lot of what they talk about in Bounce are exact accommodations for people with dyslexia and ADHD. And the reason why is in Bounce, they say that when you're training someone, like let's say you're playing football and they hit the ball in the net, they would say, no, don't hit the ball in the net. And you now see these creations where you've got a hoop with a mini net in one specific place on the big goal, and you only get a point if you get it exactly in the hoop, not roughly there. And so you
Yeah.
get this very specific feedback
Yeah.
that then makes that action very specific, and it actually builds automaticity. And without that, you don't actually build automaticity. And often people with dyslexia and ADHD don't have a very strong ability to build automaticity or habits. And so that specificness is like a knife gradually cutting a very hard surface on one point until it eventually makes that groove. And
Yeah.
once they've got that groove, they're very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Just staying on the sports side, we talked about ability to read situations. What was your son's experience of set moves? You know, when you do a corner or you do something and there's a set move and everyone's relying on you, you're going to be the fourth person in the sequence and you're going to get the goal, or you're going to be the third person in the sequence, and you don't pass it to that person, but you go for goal, or you improvise as to what you think's best in that circumstance, which is your main strength, but you're not being asked to follow your main strength. You're being asked to follow a specific process. And when you don't do it, you're regarded as being careless or arrogant, or, you're just being selfish, but actually, you just can't remember.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about the set pieces with him until you're mentioning it now. But thinking, I think quite often he himself has said, I just can't do those things that that I think I should be able to do. And I think you're right. It's because he's then not using the best parts of his brain of adapting and picking up on what's happening. It's just having to do a set process that may not work for him. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'm going to be having a longer conversation with him about that afterwards, because that's really interesting. And I think, I think he would agree that that has showed up for him.
I know some people, what they do is they take tape and they put it around their wrist and they draw out the set piece sequences on their wrist,
Ah, clever.
right? And so if there's like three or four set pieces in American football or in football or hockey or whatever, and someone calls out, we're going to do the jiggly or whatever they call the name,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, jiggly, no one knows what that is, but everyone in the team knows what that is. And
Yes.
you're kind of with dyslexia going, oh gosh, what is that one? Is it this one or is it that one? I'm not quite sure. And often
That's
you
a
don't
really good
remember it
idea.
until it happens and you see the first oh, he's standing in that corner. Gosh, yeah. Oh, I think it must be one of these two. And you're not actually remembering. You're just, getting more accurate with your prediction. And it's back to this table tennis player predicting what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And so you're really relying on this predictive strength, even because you've forgotten the thing. But they create the band and they're like, right, we're doing the jiggly. He's going there, there. I'm the third thing. Then that's going to happen. No problem. I'm on it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a technique that's used by others in sport. A lot of goalkeepers have it on their water bottle about
Oh, do
how
they?
the other team take penalties, so that if it gets to a penalty situation, they will look at that. So it's not
Wow.
seen as cheating,
No,
it's seen as a good
no.
tool. And
Yes,
yet, we should be more widely used
yes.
for that. Absolutely.
Yes, yes. And I think, kids should maybe be going out with a black marker pen and writing it on their palm if they're, oh, sir, what's that move? So you hold your hand out and you go, so he's there, I'm there, and I do this, this, and this. And they're like, yeah, that, no, 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 you need to do that, that, and that. Oh, that, and that. All right, I got it, right? And then
Yeah.
you've got it in your hands and you can follow the instructions,
And actually, the whole use of a sort of whiteboard with marking out where the players are and what's
Absolutely.
happening is so beneficial to actually see it. If they're just hearing it being said,
Absolutely.
oh, so you'll be over there and you'll be there, it means nothing. Whereas seeing little crosses on a whiteboard of, and that's you and that's so and so, yeah. And I know certainly with my son's brain, and I've seen it quite a lot with people with dyslexia, they're able to see pictures very well. So he would be able
Yes.
to imagine what that whiteboard looked like and be like,
Yes.
okay, there was that cross there, that cross there. I'm this one here.
That's right.
That's the direction I'm meant to be going in. And that
Yes.
visual side can be really, really important.
And it helps everyone having this visual. It helps everyone dump their working memory so they exactly know what everyone is talking about. And the thing is, they can say, "Oh, sir, why don't we?" So I'm there. What if I was just there? And you're not explaining it with words, you're just pointing to an exact place on the map which is just 2 foot away. And he goes, yeah, well, that would actually be quite good because you're shielding this guy and you're that would work quite well. And then you've got that dynamic thinking starting to come in as an advantage, not as a disadvantage in
Yeah.
forgetting the sequence. So you get the best of everyone. You're allowing them to sequence, and you're also allowing that strategic thinking to show up.
Yeah. And I think for my son, actually, some of his early skills developed really well because my brother was a football coach who used the Brazilian methods of each child on a ball and it all being about working with that ball and a ball at their foot the whole time. And they did little skills to music. That was part of the warm up. And I think that probably really, really helped him because he did develop those skills in a multisensory way. Whereas
Wow.
if he had had traditional football training when he was younger, he may not have picked up those skills. I think, again, for him, like in a school situation, where the difficulty came was with confidence. So we've noticed whenever he's sort of played with new teams or a different group of people, he is not as confident. And then his skill doesn't come out as much. Once he gets confident, you see the real him playing. So he's got those skills, but it's trying to sort of fit in and work out sort of where his way of doing things fits in with the wider team. And so there is an element of confidence as well. But yeah, absolutely. The Brazilian style of, or South American, really, sort of the Argentine style as well. It's just the way my brother taught, well, he got taught himself was a Brazilian style. That, yeah, one on one, on a ball. So much of their time was spent on a ball each rather than just booting the ball long distances and trying to score. So they built up those skills.
Wow. So you've got lots of ball hours, ball contact hours. Are you near the Brighton Football Club? Because the Brighton Football Club are doing amazingly well right now, aren't they?
They are, yes. No, I'm not where I am. But actually, my team is Brentford, and Brentford and Brighton are like that at the moment. So, it's not good to mention.
Oh, that's I'm touching a nerve here
You're
because
touching a nerve, but
Brighton are getting a lot of South American players up into the club, aren't they? And sort of getting in
yeah.
them into the Western clubs and so on, aren't they? It's a really good strategic play.
Yeah, and actually, Brentford are a really good example of a club that have, where are we now? Are we 3 years, or I've lost track, 3 or 4 years into being in the Premier, and they were never a top tier team. My dad had supported them since he went to his first match when he moved over from Argentina at about the age of 9 was he when he went, I think 8 or 9, and always said they'll be at the top eventually, they'll be at the top. And thankfully he just got to see them be at the top. He got to see them be at the top and Argentina win the World Cup. And then I think that was him done, bless him. He'd seen everything he needed to see. Yeah, and Brentford are a very local community team. And they've had this manager, Thomas Frank, for years, who has taught by being gentle and kind and bringing players on rather than the you must do better, you must. His approach has been incredible. I'd love to work more closely with him because it's fascinating to see the way he's brought players on and their whole dynamic of they've hardly spent any money. I think they're one of the lowest sort of output financially, but they're now currently, I believe, still 8th in the league. They were never, when they went up to Premier, you thought, well, just if they can stay up, it'll be amazing. And now, as I say, last time I looked at the league, which was a few days ago, I think it's still the same. They were 8th and Brighton were 9th. And potentially getting a European place. And it's this tiny little team. They have this slogan that we're just a bus stop in Hounslow. And literally that's what they're seen as. But they've done so well. And it's all about the psychology of it and the sort of working with people's strengths rather than the shouty, you did this wrong.
Yeah. Do you think he'd be interested in talking about dyslexia and ADHD in sport and finding that as a particular aspect that he would address within his process?
I'm going to now try and get in touch with him and see, yes.
Yeah, you should do that. That would be fantastic.
I should, yeah. On a personal and a professional level, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
And to my mum, Thomas Frank is her hero because he's like, she's so good and he's so, he does this and he does that. And my dad had so much respect for him.
Brilliant. Those 3 insights of people with dyslexia and ADHD, great 360 thinking and prediction, terrible at set plays. And what was the third one that I said? I can't remember them all. I've got them in the wrong order.
Yes, the third one was the set
unpredictable, play. Unreadable.
Unpredictable, yes.
They're unreadable. That's the important things. They can predict what's going to happen. They're very hard to read for other opponents. So they're really hard to come up against because you can't just read them, but they have the weakness of set plays. And that would be a fantastic thing.
With ADHD, it can be quite different, actually. I think what you're describing there is more of a dyslexia brain. It depends on individual strengths and weaknesses, obviously. But I know certainly for me, my mum used to laugh at me when we'd try and play tennis together when I was a teenager because I couldn't predict at all what was going to happen. And partly, I think it's that strategy. Like if I play chess with my son, he will beat me every time. And I remember him being very young and saying, oh, Mum, I'm trying to work out why you just moved that. And I thought, well, I moved it because I could. He was thinking 4 steps ahead. And I'm like, oh, I'm meant to do that, am I? Whereas I'm very much getting on with it, doing it.
In the moment, so you're not thinking ahead.
And so things like in sport, I can't predict well where things are going to go. And I'm in the moment, I'll do what I can, but it's like, oh, and it was quite an enlightenment for me when he said, I'm trying to work out why you made that move. And I was like, well, because I can, because I had space to go there. He's like, yeah, but what are you thinking ahead to? And I looked at him and was like, I think he was probably about 7 at the time. And I was like, oh, that's what I meant to do. That's why I never won a game of chess. And it was hilarious, really, this child teaching me about strategy. And you do have to actually think ahead, Mum. It's not just now. And obviously I would take my go very quickly, whereas I'd get frustrated with him because he'd spend ages thinking about where he was going to go. And I was thinking, why doesn't he just move it? And it's like, oh, yes, you're the one doing it the right way.
So this manager, is he a bit like Ted Lasso from Apple TV?
No, I've only seen that a little bit, but I can't remember exactly. But no,
oh, you've got to watch Ted Lasso on Apple TV.
I've seen it years ago. And I can't remember now.
You've got to watch all 4 seasons if you're into football and you've got a manager like that. My wife and my daughter. So I watched Ted Lasso, the first season, 2 seasons, and I was like, gosh, this is amazing, surprisingly amazing. And I convinced my daughter to watch it with me. She never watches anything with me. We started to watch the first couple of episodes, and she says, "This is really good." And we're
Oh,
talking
brilliant.
about it over dinner. So I rewatched the season, which I never do. And then we're talking about it so much that we said to my wife, who never watches TV, "You've got to watch Ted Lasso with us." So it ended up all three of us sitting on the bed with Ted Lasso on the laptop because we don't have
Oh,
a TV, and we loved it. It was absolutely incredible. And there's a lot to learn from that series, actually, in terms of sport and family and just how you manage people and so on, because that's what it's all about. It's so
yeah.
endearing. I
It's
highly
it's
recommend it.
relationships and communication, and I
Yes.
bang on about this all the time.
Yeah.
In so many scenarios, it's about how you communicate and open and honest communication, and that sort of psychological safety to be able to say, well, I don't understand this, or could we try
Yeah.
this differently? That's
Yeah.
often missing. And yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I
It's
highly
fascinating.
recommend you subscribe to Apple TV for 1 month and binge
Yes, you
watch
see, I
it with
don't
your
have Apple
son.
TV. I think I may have watched it with someone else who had it at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd forgotten. I was thinking of something else with a very shouty manager. So I was thinking, no, no, he's not like
No,
that at
no.
all. But I
He's the
do remember
kindest
now
manager.
it
So
was, yes.
basically, the premise for anyone listening, because I highly recommend you do this, is this woman inherits a Premier League team from her husband who she's divorced. And to spite him, she gets this manager from an American football team in America to come over and be the manager of a Premier League soccer team so that it dives the club, which would hurt him so much. Except his name is Ted Lasso. He comes in and he's got this philosophy of bringing out the best in people and not shouting at them and so on, that actually the team starts doing really well. And she starts reluctantly getting into it and realizing actually it might spite him even more if we win the Premier League, rather than run his team into the ground. So it's fascinating. It's lovely.
Yeah, yeah, it
Anyway,
does ring a bell more now. And yes.
I highly recommend it. So we're now up to speed with your son in college and so forth. I'm I know that you've sort of taken things to the next level in your journey. So where's the next level in your journey with dyslexia and because you got identified with ADHD, is that?
Well, I am over 3 years into the waiting list to be assessed for ADHD, but I don't think there's a lot of doubt around it.
Oh, I
However,
see.
and there are times when I think, do I even need the actual diagnosis? Do I need a label? And actually, just quickly going back to my son, we have only just had his full dyslexia assessment because for years I felt it was enough just to be aware of his strengths and challenges and work on those together and work on strategies to help the challenges.
Oh, so you
But
never got it formally
he
assessed?
has now. He has now because at
How old is he now?
university, he's 18. So for university to get disabled student allowance, which means he'll be able to have some software, be able to have some kind of mentoring and things through his degree, he needs to have an actual diagnosis. So literally 2 months ago, he did his full diagnostic assessment and everything came out in line with what we'd been going with on the strengths and challenges. And it was a really helpful report that will now go to university with him and enable him to get extra support. So with myself, I feel like, well, hang on, we've only just had that full assessed diagnosis for him and only for disabled student allowance. Do I even need to have this full diagnosis? I'm much more always about strengths and challenges and addressing them than a label. However, for me, it's more of a mental health link, really, in that I think my ADHD or undiagnosed ADHD has caused a lot of mental health issues for me right from very, very young. And mostly now I can see that. I do work that fits with the way my brain works best. I do a little bit of everything. I'm involved in different things. But if I'm having a bad day, especially mentally, and I'm thinking, why can't I just do that? I should be able to do that. And that horrible word should comes in. And I will be my own worst enemy and tell me, oh, it's just because I'm not good enough or because I'm this. Whereas I feel like if I actually get a diagnosis from a specialist and it's almost validation that it's not just me, it's not me being lazy or stupid or all the things that I've told myself at different times in my life in the past. There's a real reason for why some things are more difficult. And so that's where I'm at, is waiting to have that. I mean, I'm not just waiting, I'm getting on with life and I'm learning things. But yeah, for me, that's why I feel I do still want to go for the assessment.
I just had mine done 2 weeks ago.
Ah, okay. And
Yeah,
did
so
it come out as expected?
as expected, I've got both types, attentive and inattentive. So she was like, immediately at the end of the assessment, she says, "Would this surprise you if I say you've got both attentive and inattentive ADHD?" And I said, "No, it wouldn't surprise me. No, no." I did this arrangement. I said, "Look, I want to get the test done, but I don't want to be I don't want to be ADHD. I'm very, very happy if you say, no, actually, you're not, or you've got some traits or whatever. I'm really
Yeah.
happy with that. I just want to rule this in or out, because I have seen it started to affect my work. Well, it's always affected my work, but I've started this now that I've got greater responsibilities with Ivy and the software company, and people rely on me. A lot more relies on you at this age. You can't just kind of palm things off and just say, because you sometimes think, am I being lazy and am I being irresponsible? Do you find that, these things, you're being irresponsible or you're being lazy? Do you hear that in your
Yeah,
head?
absolutely. And I am a all or nothing person. So I'm either busy, 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 juggling loads of things, or I'm asleep. And I will
Yes,
quite regularly have daytime sleeps because I just need to shut off. And
yes,
actually, when other people always, oh, but you're so busy and you achieve so much. And I'm like, yeah, but I have daytime sleeps. I do this. And then I look at everything I've achieved and I'm like, okay, maybe that's no wonder I needed to have that sleep.
yes,
And it's just so much easier to be kinder to other people, I find, and help them with the way they are than with yourself, where you're
yes,
just put it down. And you say about age, and I think for women in particular, it has a massive impact. And there's lots coming out now around sort of being perimenopausal and menopausal and ADHD. And
yeah,
certainly I've found some of the things are very similar and get exasperated. And it's huge. Yeah, it's much more noticeable now. I think there's a mixture of things really that I think I masked a lot of things for a lot of time. I was brought up to be a well-behaved child at school and outside of the home. Generally, I was very, very
yeah,
well behaved. At home, I would have tantrums, throw my hairbrush because something wasn't right, was the stroppy child. And yeah, there was so much masking going on. And I think
yes,
over the last maybe 10 years, I've let myself be me a bit more. But also there's certain things that I couldn't hide anymore. I think with the age I am, so more things I had to just be me. And it's been refreshing to be me, but also really hard. And I've done a TikTok not that long ago about how I regularly feel, and I have done all my life, but I've only just been able to realize that sometimes I punish myself because I think I'm too much and I sort of fight for a cause too much. I hate any injustice. I will try and make things better for people. But then on the other hand, I often think I'm not enough because I feel like I haven't achieved what I should have. I never really reached the grades I was predicted for GCSEs, A levels, everything else. So it's like I should have done better. So I've had
yeah,
this thing all my life of being too much and not enough. And
yes,
that's really hard to work with. But now that I can recognize it, and I do a lot of work with other people, children and adults, about the importance of being able to name our emotions, being able to understand what's going on. And as a child, I just felt weird a lot of the time. And that came out as stroppiness. And mainly I was cross with myself. But
yes,
I would hold it in generally with people outside of the house and with my family, like my parents and my brother and sister, who were all lovely to me. And partly it might have been youngest child kind of thing that I got away with behaving like that. But it had to come out at some point because I was sort of channeling this, I can follow the rules, I can do everything the way I'm meant to. And then every now and then it had to come out. And I say generally at school, I was very, very well behaved. If there was something I saw was an injustice, that was it. A totally different Liz came out that kind of shocked everyone, because this isn't the quiet girl that we know. And I, as I said earlier, I changed from the girls' grammar school to a college at 16. And that was a big shock, because mostly it was your real rebels that did that at 16. It was the ones who, wanted a wild life and to go out drinking every night and wanted to be mixing with boys and things, whereas I wasn't that wild child at all. But I just knew I could not keep fighting against this system where things like having the right shade of blue little hairband was important, because to me it's like, that's not important, but being fair to everyone is. So yeah, it's been a real sort of development. And a few years ago, I was at the point where I wanted to do further study, forgetting how much my emotions, my brain possibly don't cope very well with traditional study. And I went down the route of either doing a dyslexia specialist course so that I could assess, or doing a master's in psychology. And for various reasons, I decided the master's in psychology was more suitable for me. It fitted in with my sort of education and special needs background, as well as the sort of marketing and comms side. So I did that. And through that, I learned a lot. I'm not sure if most of it was from what I was being told in the lectures, or a lot of it is what I learned about myself and about the education system, and about how we could better support people, and why it doesn't always work for everyone, and how people can be deemed to be not very intelligent because they don't fit the education system, but actually there's a lot going on there and they've got a lot to offer. So it's been it was a difficult process to go through the masters, and doing it part-time alongside being mostly self-employed, working, some teaching, bringing up teenagers. Thankfully, my teenagers are the level part, really. I'm like the teenager when it came to exams and things, and they were doing GCSEs and A-levels at the time. They would be so calm about it and take it all in their stride. And I'd be the one saying, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm going to fail. I can't do it. And they'd be very calm and say, Mum, but you can. And it's really interesting to see them talk about some of their friends and analyze their different styles. And my son recently said, well, so-and-so is like you, Mum. He thinks he can't do it, but he can. And it's been fascinating to see them see all these different strengths. And I've never hidden things from my children. I've talked about the fact that I get really stressed about certain things. I don't think I can do it. And I've sort of encouraged them to talk about their emotions and not see it as a negative. So it was a really sort of powerful experience for me going through the masters. And then we had to do a research project as part of that at the end. And it was important to me that that was something that really meant something to me. And I would say it's the part of the whole masters that I enjoyed the most, because it had meaning and I was doing it for a purpose. So I chose to do it on mental health literacy in young people. So looking at what young people know about mental health, and where there are things that they don't understand, whether they know how to seek help and whether they will seek help. And I was amazed at how much buy-in I got, because it was a very quick study, really, compared to a lot of studies. And I got over 400 young people between the age of 16 and 20 to complete a mental health literacy questionnaire. Oh, wow. And partly, I think that was a lot of children I've worked with in the past, or my children's friends, who were like, yeah, we want to support this because we know she cares about that. And, I have always had a very pastoral side to my teaching. And it was really interesting to see things that came out of it. I did a mixed method study. So I did the questionnaire, but then I also interviewed education and mental health professionals, and sort of with the results from the study. And, does it surprise you that young people know about self-help strategies, but they're not so keen to seek external help when they need to? And there were some really interesting things that came out about like that, from the sense of actually social media is fantastic for helping people to understand about self-help. But because there's such an emphasis on self-help, then it's almost deemed as you shouldn't be seeking external help because I've been told that I've got all these self-help strategies I can use. I shouldn't have to seek external help. Plus the
Wow.
wider issue of if you try to seek external help, what is there and how long's the waiting list going to be? So there are lots of reasons why these different things are built up, and some areas of mental health literacy are much stronger than
Yeah.
others. And I found that really fascinating. And then from that, I was presenting about my research at a government think tank to do with dyslexia. And there was a professor from Aston University, Professor Joel Talcott, listening. And in my typical excited way, I got a bit carried away talking about, I'd love to do more research about this, and I'd love to link it specifically with dyslexia and other neurodivergencies, because I think the mental health side of things there are even bigger and even more important that we're addressing them early. And he sort of reached out to me and, have you considered doing a PhD to consider this, to carry on this research? And I like, no, tell me more. and again, my children are so wise. And my son said, Mum, write down a list of ground rules for you of what you wouldn't consider doing and what you would. And one thing for me was I do not want to be in a position to be sitting more written exams. So when I found out the PhD wouldn't be written exams, there'd be a spoken examination really at the end of it. I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can talk about what I've learned and what I know. For some reason, it doesn't work for me very well to write it down because almost there's too much that I want to get down. So I am exploring the possibility. It kind of just seemed too good an opportunity not to do because I'm so passionate about it. And I feel like it's so needed to understand that we all understand more and that there's more provision.
You sent an email to me about this, and I didn't completely understand it. I didn't realize it was you that was doing the research. So you're putting forward a PhD thesis idea to research, and you're looking for people to fund your research. Is that right?
Yeah, that's more or less it. So Joel Talcott sort of suggested that because Aston University have a PhD in health and wellbeing, and it could fit into that. It very much fits into his work around dyslexia. And he offered to be one of my supervisors. He's got someone else on board to potentially be a supervisor. And then it depends on funding. We applied for one general funding pot and unfortunately weren't successful with that. He really believes that this is something that should be done. And he's spoken to people internally at Aston University who are also keen to support it, but we need additional funding for it to happen so that I can do that research supported by him and really make a difference for how the education system and beyond support neurodivergent children and young people with their mental health. And for me, I have a passion for helping everyone with their mental health. But if we can address things early, then we get children and young people who know how to support their own mental health, who grow up into adults who have got strategies for supporting their mental health when it's not good, and also lots of protective factors against poor mental health. So I just think it's so important and something that, obviously I'm very passionate about. It brings in lots of different areas for me professionally and personally and academically, but we need the funding to make it happen.
Sponsored by Ivy. Imagine turning your meeting's audio into a live mind map instantly so you remember what matters. Well, try Ivy for free now at ivy.app. That's IVVI.app. So first of all, what's the title of the research you want to do?
So it's a working title at the moment, and I'm going to read it so that I actually get the wording right as to where we're at. So it's about enhancing mental health literacy among young people, evaluating inclusive and educational interventions and policy implications for positive mental health support. And that title in itself isn't very neurodivergent friendly, but when you see it written down, the essence is that there is this thing called mental health literacy that is about how well people understand what mental health is how to support their own mental health, how to support other people's mental health. And by that being stronger, so people having a stronger mental health literacy, they are armed with protective factors against poor mental health. And it,
So
for
they're
me,
ready with
the
those
evaluate,
strategies in advance.
yes, and then the evaluating part is evaluating how education policy and practice can make sure that's really inclusive, and that children and young people are being enabled with that mental health literacy in the same way that they get other literacy support, and in the same way they're taught about sustainability in the environment, they can also be taught about mental health literacy.
So is it going to be kind of quite general like that, or are you going to zoom in on like dyslexia or ADHD or what? Because you've not mentioned anything specific in that. What's your thought
Yes. So
with regard
the
to
inclusive
where
part is the
dyslexia
bit,
fits?
yeah, the inclusive part is the bit that links to the fact that we want to really focus on neurodiversity. But partly we're keeping it a little bit open because as we do the study, we may see different areas that needs more focus. But certainly there will be, whereas with my initial study, it's a very quick one. You can't go into too much depth. You can't break it all down. So all I knew really about the people who answered the interview questions was that they were between 16 and 20. Whereas with this, I want to know much more about whether they identify as being neurodivergent, have got an assessment, or have got sort of obvious indicators, and look at how it affects mental health literacy, and then also their actual own mental health. So definitely neurodivergence will be a key part of it, alongside potentially looking at things like where they live, what their schooling is like, other demographics that I think we will explore more as we do the study and as things come out.
Okay, so how does that normally get funded? Something like that? Do I mean, how much do you need?
Now, I'm not exactly sure on all the funding side of it. There are stipends that come from government funding to certain universities, and then it's all a very complex system of how you apply for this, that, and the other. Some things universities will provide part of the funding themselves. And then what we're looking at the moment is a charity or an organization for who the research would be helpful, and they want to be involved early to be able to say, well, actually, it would really help us with our work if we knew how could we teach teachers, for example, to enhance mental health in young people, or this topic of mental health literacy, should it be explicitly taught, or should it just be filtered through other areas? So it might be that young people's mental health charities want to support it,
Yeah.
or organizations involved in supplying education resources think, okay, we really want to be a part of this, so we will help to fund it, and then we will have some say in the direction of the research and be able to use the findings. I would be able to speak on their behalf about what I've found out.
Ah, fascinating. Great.
But
Well,
yeah, I have to say, I mean, I never planned on doing a PhD. I typically think of myself as not being that academic. So it's not something that I've always dreamt of doing a PhD. And I've had this plan of how it will all work out. So it's a whole new area to me. And I've had to overcome a lot in my own head in this process. When Joel first sent me sort of documentation about what I had to do to apply, my initial thought was, well, I can't do that. I don't even understand the application forms. I can't do that. If I can't
yeah,
do that, how can I do a PhD?
yes.
And through trying to talk to myself as if I'm talking to someone else, and like, hang on, maybe you can do it. Take it one step at a time. I mean, ridiculous things. Like at some points, I was like, no wonder I didn't know what to do. I didn't look at the guidance sheet that goes with it. That would make sense. And if it was anyone else, I'd be saying, well, what information have you got? But that panic sets in with myself. I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm
Yeah.
obviously stupid. And it's like,
Yes.
no, everyone needs guidance and things. Like there were certain parts of it I thought, well, how do I know what my proposal is when I haven't started? And then Joel would say to me, well, obviously we will help to guide you. You give us an outline, we'll help with that. I'm like, oh, you help me. Right. I very much have this sense that I should be able to do everything myself, without having been taught. There's an example from when I was 3, where my mum walked into our living room. I was sat with a whole load of Ladybird books around me, which I presume were my brothers and sisters who were older, and I was crying. And she asked me what was wrong. And I said, I'm going to be starting school soon and I can't read yet. So there's always been this inbuilt thing in my head. And I wouldn't say it's parental pressure or anything like that. It's just me feeling like I should be able to do things without ever having been taught it. And it should be able to do it independently. And it's, I do find it quite amusing now. And I can challenge myself on it. But yes, as with everything, this PhD idea is like, well, can I do it? How can I do it? And
I've got an idea for you.
Yeah, go on.
Finish off what you were going to say there, but because I cut you off for a minute, but you said I.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is that I knew it's good to know your own limitations realistically, not just the ones you tell yourself you can or can't do. And one thing for me was knowing that if Joel Talcott was going to be my supervisor, and I don't know him well, he had to be willing to put up with this self-doubt of mine.
Right.
And I sent him an email at one point in the process saying, look, I'm having a lot of self-doubt now. I really don't know if I can do it. I'm not someone who ever thought they'd be doing a PhD. I don't know if it's feasible. And he sent me the most beautiful email back that made me feel he really understood where I was coming from, explained it was completely normal to feel like that. And that gave me the confidence to think, yes, I can do it. And yes, I know I'm going to be supported externally, as well as me developing my own internal support system. So that was really important for me.
Fantastic. We're going to get him on the podcast as well, which is
that's fantastic. It's really good. He was really keen.
Great, because to hear his work about the dyslexia journal that he's editor of, I never heard of it. It sounds fascinating. I looked at
He's done all sorts of work, and I think he's quite a modest person who maybe doesn't talk about his work that much, but he's done some fantastic things. So yeah, absolutely. It'll be great to have him on the podcast.
This is the idea. Could you rope in football clubs or football? Because you've just told this story about how football has been a lifesaver for your son and probably for his mental health as well.
Yep.
We also know that sport is a complete lifesaver for so many people's mental health. We also know actual physical exercise is great for your mental health and all sorts, And so I'm just wondering, this is a bit off the wall, but maybe you could use it as an excuse to speak to the manager of the football club to say, look, I'm exploring.
Yeah, I like your thinking. And actually, it's also whether I speak to Joel about what about if we slightly switch the research focus to do with neurodiversity and mental health and sport. And I've done this with my work and Collectively Diverse. I was trying to be more targeted rather than doing a bit of everything. But typically, me being me, I'm offering training to everyone and all this different stuff. And just in the last week or two, I'm like, right, I'm going to be more focused around it being my main thing is that I offer sports training, and I'm going to do some training with a rugby club near Northampton later in the year. I'm speaking at a local sports board soon. And I think you could be right with the research. Maybe that's what it needs as well, is that sport link to it, and then speak to sports clubs and see if there's any funding that way. Oh my goodness, if I could get Brentford to support it, that would be like amazing. And it would be like a little sign to my dad as well. So that would be amazing.
I feel good about that. I think if you went to him, the manager, and he might not be the one who ends up doing it, but he'll know a lot of people, and you could craft something along those lines.
Yeah.
And I think there's something powerful about being really specific, and it could also help, your existing roles. There's an interplay between the two rather than living in two separate worlds or adjoining worlds, but they're actually overlaid on each other. It would be enrich one another.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's fantastic. My mind is already like going at 200 miles an hour thinking, who do I speak to next? What order do I do it in?
And I really would suggest that you make it targeted towards dyslexia. And that this is the reason why, okay? There's an issue that I'm having with the word neurodiversity. And, it's hard to talk about this because people are trying to be so inclusive. But the problem with neurodiversity as a word is I think it's going to have a very short timeline. I think it's going to have a very short use by date because what's going to happen, as we've seen with words over the years of our life, certain buzzwords have come in and then they've gone out and come in and gone out. Do you remember the time when retarded was the politically correct term for a
Yeah, I think it
person?
was a little bit well,
For
no, probably as a child it was in my time, but
well,
certainly as a teacher it
I
was seen
was
as a big
called
no-no. But
retarded.
yeah,
I was called retarded as a 5-year-old child at school. My teachers got my mum and dad in and said, "Oh, Mr. Namdaran, Mrs. Namdaran, I think your child is retarded."
wow,
Yeah.
wow,
Well,
yeah,
but to be fair to them, the term had a very different meaning at
it
the time.
did.
Okay, to be fair. Now, I'm not saying neurodiversity is going to have that same connotation at all, but what I'm using that as an illustration of how terms can be used or dropped because they don't fulfill their function. At the moment, neurodiversity is creating a discussion,
Yeah,
but the problem is neurodiversity has two issues with it as a term. Issue one is if you say, I'm neurodiverse, then you're by implication saying there are people who are neurotypical. And so you're saying, well, neurodiverse, different thinking, and then typical thinking. So people are define typical, and how do you define neurodiverse? And then you kind of start saying, well, actually, really, everyone's a bit neurodiverse and thinks differently and so on. And so the neurodiverse word will end up being, well, everyone thinks differently. We need to accommodate everyone. And people like, absolutely, totally agree with that. But then
yeah.
it's like, how useful is that term now? It's got no
I
value.
I got a different take on this along the same lines. And again, I've written a blog about it. I've sort of entered into a few little discussions on LinkedIn and things recently about
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
So, and it was when I was first setting up Collectively Diverse, and a friend who has worked, it was a teacher and has worked around autism for many years, looked at some of what I'd done and said, look, I just want to check you've got the understanding right of the term neurodivergent. She was very polite the way she put it. And I was like, yeah, because it includes everyone. And I'll go on to explain that a bit more. And then she explained more to me. I was like, I get it now. And I change things. Now, the way I see it now is I compare it
Could
to
you explain where
biodiversity.
she was coming from? She was coming from neurodiverse really is another term for how autistic people. Is that where she was coming from?
No, no,
No?
that
Oh,
it's,
okay.
I can't remember how she put it to me. I kind of put it to her, and then I realized that I wasn't really using it in the way I was trying to. So,
Okay.
biodiversity, in terms of the environment and the flora and fauna, is all the different living things in a certain area and how they work together.
Yes.
For me, that is what we should be thinking of. And I think long term, it's less important to have labels for dyslexia or ADHD or autism. It's more important to know that we are all different, but we have different strengths and challenges. And that so we are all neurodiverse. Some of us are neurodivergent or neurotypical. Now, I think the neurotypical side of it will become less of a thing because, in a way, we no two brains are the same.
No,
Is there a neurotypical? Probably not.
no.
Everyone's different. And I think for me, the understanding of us all being different but working together and a more flexible structure for education, for work, for communities is so, so important. So I would prefer to see the term neurodiversity used more, but with full understanding, and not people just think that neurodiverse means you have ADHD or autism or dyslexia. Neurodiverse is everyone. We are all neurodiverse. And if we work in the right way together, we can increase each other's strengths independently and also as a cohort in a community. And to me, that's really, really important. And that's literally only come over the last few years. I've developed this kind of feeling about neurodiversity and understanding. And I remember several years ago, the British Dyslexia Association offering some free training across the country. And it was before I was working for them, but I offered to help in my area. And nobody had heard of neurodiversity at all. So hardly anybody came to the training. It was actually really good training. So there has been a difference, but I actually think there's a lot of power in the term neurodiversity to include everyone, and then think within that where each of our strengths and challenges are and how we support each other, and this real importance of any system being flexible for each individual's needs, and that not meaning, oh, it's a pain because I've got to change this for that person, that for... Actually, I'd love to hear managers and CEOs saying, it's amazing, by us changing this for this one person, it's also helped lots of other people. Then they've come up with a solution we've been looking at to try and find for years, and our whole company has grown because of it, which is what I believe should happen and can happen. So I think it's sort of a way of looking at it in a way.
Yeah, interesting to get your take on it. Liz, this has been fantastic. I wish you all the best in getting your funding for your
Thank
PhD.
you.
And I hope it becomes football orientated, because that would be really exciting.
It would be very exciting, yeah.
And do you know what? Ted Lasso is all about mental health.
Yes. Yes,
You know,
I need to get directly in touch with Ted Lasso.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, Liz, it's been fantastic. Any final things you want to share with people, like things in the show notes that we can direct? How do people find out about you, get to connect with you, etc.?
Yeah, so I'll put my details for LinkedIn and also the website Collectively Diverse, which, as I mentioned, is a community interest company. So the idea is to apply for funding for that separate to my research, to be able to offer subsidized and free training so that organizations and community groups who couldn't afford to have training about how to meet everyone's individual needs can still have access to that. So I'll provide you with those details. And also, we mentioned earlier about Touch, Type, Read and Spell. I'll give you my affiliate link so that people can go through that and get 10% off. And anything really that I've talked about, please just get in touch with me and chat. I love finding out other people's views. And in talking to people, we kind of work on more ideas and make more changes. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
My pleasure, Liz. It's been great to hear your dyslexia story from beginning to end, and including ADHD. There's always these co-occurring things that happen, and it's really a big part of the story is that often it's not just dyslexia, it's co-occurring ADHD or all sort. We're very, like you say, like biodiversity, we have very diverse ways of thinking. So it's been great. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you very much.
See ya. Bye. This podcast is sponsored by dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com. It's my day job when I'm not hosting this podcast. Tell me, do you know what you want to achieve in the workplace, but you're struggling with how to achieve it? Maybe you suspect some traits of dyslexia are getting in the way. Well, that's where Dyslexia Productivity Coaching comes in, because we give you a simple productivity system for your Apple devices that harnesses the creativity that comes with your dyslexia. It includes proven methods like note-taking, reminders, speech-to-text, mind mapping, and more, all tailored to your needs. It'll free up your time and help you achieve outstanding results. Book a complimentary call to discuss it with me, and if you do it soon, I may also be available to coach you personally via Zoom. So don't be shy, go to dyslexiaproductivitycoaching.com or swipe up and book it now.